Hi, I'm
Ogren Skullbreaker.
you can watch me be
Heretics.
in Comcast Cablevision. Comcast Cable. Hi, I'm
Ogren Skullbreaker.
you can watch me fight
Heretics.
on Cock Cable. Cock the cock. Hi, I'm you
Ogren Skullbreaker.
can watch me beat
Heretics.
on Salmon's Cablevision.
No, Salmon's Communication.
All right. Hi, I'm you
Ogren Skullbreaker.
can watch me beat
Heretics.
on Samsonite Cable.
No, Salmon.
So I want to open this by making sure everyone knows that I am not a Warhammer/40k subject expert, because there are easier ways to avoid reproduction. So if you were hoping for an insightful review by someone who knows what the fuck is going on here, you haven't found that. Before Darktide, I'd read a few stories that were mid but entertaining, and I played a few games that were mid but entertaining. So I really don't have to tell you what my overall impression of this universe was. Given that, I couldn't even fully say what compelled me to pick this one up in the first place, but I'm very happy I did, and I'm very happy that this review will be mostly positive, because Warhammer fans make me a little nervous. But Darktide isn't just a quirky treat for the battered and abused fanbase to enjoy, it's like an actually good game by normal human standards. Despite some predictable performance lapses and an economy that I do not adore, Darktide flies beyond all of my expectations for a AA horde shooter, and I'm willing to say, at the risk of sounding a little bit like a mongoloid, that it has something to offer everyone. It can be a frenetic power fantasy of thoughtless violence, a calculated assault that requires quick thinking and effective teamwork, or a ridiculous fucking nightmare, all at the flip of a switch. And the base gameplay mechanics are solid and fun enough to support all three. But let's open with talking hardware. If you're thinking about storing this game on your external drive, don't. Because I did, and it took me 7 real-life minutes to open it, and multiple minutes at every loading screen after. Now, my specs aren't exactly top of the line, and this was back during the open beta days, so your individual level of suffering might vary, but I still recommend stashing this on the solid-state drive if you have one, which I didn't, so I bought one in the interest of not losing my fucking mind. The load times were right about cut in half, so they're only moderately worse than most other games now. The game is just generally taxing on your hardware. If you're still repping 6 gigs of VRAM like a disgusting poor person, or yours truly, I hope you're not bothered by low quality textures. Honestly, the game still looks good to me, but I'm really not the graphics snob type, so I will leave that up to individual discernment. Darktide's performance shortcomings at this early point in its life are partially the result of its outstanding visuals, and partially the result of the optimization team at Fat Shark actually just being a couple silly monkeys fighting over a pair of blue light glasses. Games releasing in a barely functional state is hardly a rarity anymore, and I'm not here to offer the same old YouTuber rant about that. Just be aware that she's a fixer-upper. I've also had a few crashes occur, but they used to be completely random, and now they only happen when the game is actively trying to load a bunch of things. So I suppose we'll call that progress. Just know that despite Darktide's AA classification, the game comes with some distinctly AAA characteristics, namely that it's a little fucking broken. But unlike most AAA games, it also comes with gameplay that's actually fun. Darktide is a 4-player objective-based horde shooter taking place in a sprawling hive city called Tertium. There's 4 classes to choose from, with each having some unique weapons, skills, and passive traits. It's definitely not the kind of tactical game where every class is fulfilling a pivotal role and is essential in every mission. If you want to bring 4 Ogrins and collectively whack everything to death with shovels, that's not only viable at every level of play, it's beautiful. The second-to-second gameplay is an interesting mix of melee and shooting that I don't think any other games have really balanced in the same way, and the classes have a lot of flavor variation between them. I mean, everyone will perform melee to some extent, this is not a request, but the classes are generally separated into a frontline and a range group. Odrin is the tank. I think that probably goes without saying. He's also the only class whose weapons are entirely unique to him and who is excluded from using any of the weapons available to others, because his big boy fingers simply cannot grip them properly. From the single-shot shotgun that doubles as a bat, to the bayoneted whatever the fuck this thing is, to his shield, everything about the Ogren Skullbreaker is geared towards being a slower, heavy-hitting rock. His comrade on the front lines is the much more normal-sized Zealot Preacher, and if Ogren plays like an experienced bodyguard, Zealot plays like a ravenous crack fiend whose lair you have disturbed. He has a boost to attack speed and a get out of death free card every 90 seconds, and extra damage the lower his health gets. Additionally, after a few level ups, he has a string of feats dedicated to greatly increasing his crit chance and toughness meter, which is kind of like a shield that lets chip damage through, as well as one for greatly increasing the toughness meter every time a crit is landed. These all stack, by the way. As you can imagine, this blend of upgrades can have substantial gameplay effects, like imperviousness to damage. Despite this, there's a healthy mix of Darktide fans who think Zealot's the worst class in the game, and I think the solution to their ignorance is simple. Do not patch these clearly broken attributes. Make them all understand the fruits of true devotion. Moving on to our more ranged focused classes, we have the Veteran Sharpshooter. Is he my favorite class in the game? No. But is he my least favorite? Yes. He's the least melee-focused of our cast, with feats and passives that encourage keeping distance and laying a constant blanket of fire. He has an ability to mark enemies for substantial bonus damage, making him valuable in any mission with additional special enemies. In general, he's totally satisfying to play, and with him on the team, it's nice to know that there's someone who can help with rapidly thinning the herd. They steal all the fucking ammo though, so they're still, mostly a burden. And then finally, moving on to what is an even more unique class than Ogren, we have the Psyker. Psykers get a loadout, a gun and a melee weapon, but the real star of their show is the ability to blow up people's heads using magic. This is predictably a one-shot on basic mob enemies in most specials, and a huge blow to the larger specials and mini-bosses, especially when it's stacked with Sharpshooter's marking abilities. The skill is balanced out by the peril meter. Essentially, the more that a Psyker blows up heads in succession, the fuzzier their own head gets, and if they get too fuzzy, they stop working. There's a great rhythm to balancing Psyker skills with their peril in addition to the more traditional combat options. Darktide also includes a handful of mechanics that encourage teams to stick together and actually cooperate. The big one being that the aforementioned toughness meter just straight up doesn't refill at all if you're not alongside at least one of the boys, and you only reach full refill potential when the entire team is together. Sometimes it is the best move for the team to split up and complete minor objectives, but there's a pretty intense and straightforward handicap associated with everyone splitting up to hunt for loot, doing their own fucking thing. Darktide isn't the most tactical game ever, but it's very much a team game, and it makes playing with randos a complete nightmare about half of the time. Sometimes we'll have no idea how to stay together and it goes about as well as you'd think, and sometimes everyone grasps that concept, but the more nuanced gameplay strategies like don't shoot the exploding barrel that your teammate is next to, or we have to actually complete the objective to progress, gets lost on some of us and we're back to square one. The game did just release though, our smooth gamer brains probably just need a little time to start wrinkling. The overall world and creature design is very striking. It reminds me quite potently of my last trip to Baltimore. After the first few hours in the game, I wasn't really sure what was going on with the map situation on account of it seemed like I was revisiting some memorable locations, but they were attached to completely different locales. The answer I found goes as such. There's a small handful of maps in Darktide, but these maps are broken down in a collection of unique chunks. When any given map is being loaded, about half of the total map chunks are taken and randomly assembled into that mission's playspace. And I think this really helps curtail what could have otherwise resulted in a feeling of repetitiveness for many players. And not every game could get away with that, aesthetically speaking, but the city of Tertium is at its core a maze-like industrial hellscape, so it ends up working kind of beautifully. This does seem like a game that's going to be supported with new content for a little while to come, so I'm hopeful about seeing the enemy variety expand, just visually speaking. What's here at launch is good work, but it's not exactly a widespread. What there is a lot of is original music, and the Darktide soundtrack is way fucking better than it has any right to be. It's got this blend of fittingly metallic and booming percussion, blaring synths, and operatics that flow between the quaint and the epic. I'm not the listens to video game soundtracks at the gym sort of guy, but if these are your thing, then Darktide shouldn't disappoint at all. As far as mission types, there's definitely variety, but what makes them unique isn't major enough to help them all starkly contrast, The differences in objective between kill bad guy, take stuff from train, and hack computers with skull robot, in gameplay terms, are either simple enough or take up a small enough portion of their respective mission that the mission types blend together a bit and I really have no preference for any in particular. This is another area where the inherent fun of the base combat is really carrying the experience, but players that don't live for the grind might start to check out if missions don't get a little more interesting. Now looking at progression in the economy, I'll start with what I do like, which are character feats. Upon hitting certain level thresholds with a character, a collection of traits and abilities opens up. You pick one and you can swap it out for one of the others whenever you want. As you continue reaching new level thresholds, you'll find that some of these feats chain together into something of a particular build, but they can be mixed and matched to suit whatever you're feeling. It's a very simple system, no bells and whistles, very little advanced mathematics, and I'm a fan. What's also simple, but in a much less satisfying way, is weapon progression. And I think it's worth noting that even as we're beyond version 1.0, there are components to the game's gear upgrade systems that haven't been introduced yet. So that might say something about how important they are in the first place, but obviously they could have a big impact on how the economy feels once they are implemented. As of now, the in-game economy feels kind of like a waste of time. I mean, it functions, right? You earn money and resources in missions, and these funds help you buy new, slightly improved copies of your weapons or upgrade your current weapon into a slightly improved state. Repeat forever. The system in place doesn't hurt anything, there just isn't any thought to it on the part of the player, and new weapons and upgrades are the crux of the in-game economy, with the other small portion being cosmetics. I just feel like if we're going to constantly be buying gear, that's great, I love it, but there has to be an ounce of strategy or some kind of stressor associated with continuously taking part in an economy. Maybe it's weapons degrade over time and you have to switch to other options for a round while you pay to have them repaired every few missions. Or you could even take that sort of Tarkov hunt showdown approach to buying and losing gear. I don't know. I'll reiterate that I am not a programmer or a designer or an economist, or even a particularly smart human being. I just know when I'm very underwhelmed, and it's when I'm buying, selling, or upgrading weapons in Darktide. Alright, I think we've covered most of what we needed to. Bird's eye summary? It's a really enjoyable experience. I'm going to continue plugging hours into this, and I'm looking forward to the updates. Something I don't think I mentioned earlier in the video is that Darktide is also a Game Pass title, so if you already pay for that, good for you. I have no fucking clue what your financial situation looks like or if your rig can even run this thing, so I don't know if I recommend it, but I know that I'm having fun. So I'll talk to you guys later.